The morning sun rose over Nexus Prime like any other day, casting golden light across the human settlement that sat nestled between towering alien structures. Commander Jake Morrison stood on his balcony, watching his 7-year-old daughter Emma chase butterfly-like creatures through the garden below. She laughed as the creatures changed colors when she got close, her blonde hair bouncing with each jump. Jake smiled despite the weight on his shoulders. 15 years had passed since humanity made first contact with the Galactic Council, and only 3 years since they established this colony on the neutral world. Everything still felt new and fragile. Emma had adapted better than most adults. She played with alien children whose names Jake could barely pronounce, learning their games and sharing human ones in return. The other species found her fascinating. This small creature from the species everyone called newcomers. Some were kind, offering gifts and asking endless questions about Earth. Others kept their distance, viewing humans as primitives who stumbled into galactic society too early. Jake tried not to think about the second group too much. Today was the Festival of Unity, an annual celebration where every species on Nexus Prime shared their culture through food, music, and displays. Jake had promised Emma they would go together after his morning briefing with the diplomatic staff. She had been talking about it for weeks, excited to see the Andrali light dancers and taste the crystallized fruit from the Plenor homeworld. He watched her now, so full of joy and wonder, and felt grateful they had this chance at a peaceful life among the stars. The briefing went longer than expected. Ambassador Helen Carter was worried about increasing tensions with the Velkari, the warrior species that controlled 3 systems near human space. They had been vocal opponents of humanity's admission to the Council, arguing that Earth was too violent and unstable. Several Velkari delegates had walked out of meetings when humans spoke. Helen wanted to organize a cultural exchange to ease relations, but Jake knew the Velkari too well. They respected only strength, and humanity was still proving itself. By the time Jake finished and returned home, Emma was bouncing with impatience. She wore her favorite blue dress and had convinced one of their alien neighbors to paint her face with traditional Andrali symbols. Jake laughed and took her hand, leading her into the crowded streets where thousands of beings from dozens of worlds mingled together. Music filled the air, strange instruments creating sounds that human ears had never evolved to hear properly. Food vendors sold items that ranged from familiar to absolutely bizarre. Emma's eyes went wide at everything. They spent hours moving from display to display. Emma tried on Helverin's ceremonial masks, watched Torlik's engineers demonstrate gravity manipulation, and carefully touched the living crystal gardens grown by the Luminae. Jake stayed close, one hand always near his daughter, aware that even in this peaceful setting, humans were still outsiders. Most species were friendly, but there were always those who looked at them with something like contempt. The Velkari section was impossible to miss. They had erected a massive stone monument in the central plaza, covered in harsh angular writing that described their greatest military victories. Velkari warriors stood guard around it, each one nearly 8 feet tall, covered in dark purple scales and carrying ceremonial weapons that looked entirely too real. Jake steered Emma away from that area. The Velkari had made clear that humans were not welcome near their displays. But Emma was 7 years old, and 7-year-olds do not always listen. While Jake stopped to buy water from a vendor, she wandered toward the monument, drawn by its size and the beautiful crystals embedded in the stone. Other children were touching displays all over the festival. She did not know this one was different. She reached out and placed her small hand on the crystal surface, feeling its warmth. The Velkari guard saw her instantly. High Commander Zelthor, the ranking Velkari officer on Nexus Prime, moved with frightening speed. He grabbed Emma by her arm and lifted her off the ground. She cried out in fear and pain. Jake turned at the sound and his heart stopped. He dropped everything and ran toward them, pushing through the crowd. Zelthor was shouting in his language, his voice booming across the plaza. Other Velkari surrounded him, weapons raised. Emma was crying, begging to be put down. Jake reached them and held up his hands, trying to stay calm even though panic was tearing through him. He apologized, explained she was just a child, promised it would not happen again. Please, just let her go. Zelthor switched to the common galactic language so everyone could understand. The human child had desecrated their sacred monument. She had touched it with unworthy hands. Under Velkari law, the punishment for desecrating religious sites was death. No exceptions, not even for children. He wanted everyone to see what happened when lesser species disrespected Velkari honor. Jake begged. He offered himself instead. He tried to reach Emma, but other Velkari blocked him. Ambassador Carter arrived with station security. Aliens from a dozen species, all trying to calm the situation. They assured Zelthor this was a mistake, a child's innocent error. Surely the Velkari were reasonable people who could show mercy. The crowd that had gathered murmured agreement. This had gone too far. Zelthor looked at all of them with cold eyes. He said the Velkari were not weak like other council races. They did not bend their laws for sentiment. He drew his blade, a weapon that hummed with energy. Emma screamed. Jake lunged forward, but the guards held him back. Helen shouted for station security to stop this, but they stood frozen, unwilling to interfere in what Zelthor claimed was Velkari sovereign right under council law. The blade fell. Emma's screams stopped. The plaza went silent. Jake's world ended. They released him, and he caught her before she hit the ground. Her body was so small in his arms, so light. Blood soaked into his uniform. He could not breathe, could not think. Around him, aliens stared in shock. Some were horrified, others uncertain. Helen was screaming into her communicator, demanding council intervention. But Zelthor simply cleaned his blade and returned it to its sheath. He announced that justice had been served according to law. Anyone who disagreed could file a complaint through proper channels. Station security finally moved, but only to establish a perimeter. They cited diplomatic immunity and council regulations. Zelthor could not be arrested or detained. The Velkari had sovereign territory on Nexus Prime, and what happened within that territory was beyond local jurisdiction. Helen argued until her voice went hoarse, but the security commander would not budge. The law was clear, even if it was terrible. Jake sat on the ground holding his daughter while alien medics confirmed what he already knew. Emma was gone. 7 years old, and she was gone because she touched a stone. The festival continued in muted fashion around them, as if the universe had not just collapsed. Zelthor and his warriors returned to their section, showing no remorse. To them, this was justice. To Jake, it was murder. The news spread across Nexus Prime within the hour and reached Earth within the day. The news hit Earth like a physical blow. Every screen, every device, every news channel carried the same horrific story. A human child had been executed by an alien commander on Nexus Prime, and the Galactic Council had declared it legal. Within hours, protests erupted in every major city across the planet. Millions poured into the streets, carrying pictures of Emma Morrison and demanding justice. The anger was unlike anything the world had seen since the Resource Wars. President Richard Cole watched the protests from the White House, his jaw clenched tight. He had been in office for 6 years, elected on a platform of peaceful integration with the galactic community. He had believed that humanity could find its place among the stars through diplomacy and cooperation. Now a child was dead, and the aliens were hiding behind their laws. His advisors argued about sanctions and diplomatic pressure, but Richard knew those words meant nothing. The Council did not respect humanity enough to care about economic threats. He made a call to a number that only 3 people on Earth knew existed. The line connected after 2 rings. A woman's voice answered, calm and professional. Admiral Patricia Hayes confirmed she could be at the White House within the hour. Richard told her to bring everything. They both knew what that meant. Patricia arrived with 2 armed guards carrying sealed cases. She dismissed Richard's staff and Secret Service, leaving only the president in the room. The guard set down the cases and left. Patricia opened the first one and pulled out a data tablet that was not connected to any network. She handed it to Richard and watched his face as he scrolled through the files. The archive had been established 40 years ago, long before first contact. Back then, Earth was tearing itself apart over resources. The resource wars had nearly ended human civilization. Nations built weapons designed to crack continents and boil oceans. Fleets of warships fought in orbit while billions died below. Humanity had learned to wage war on a scale that made historical conflicts look like children's games. Then the wars ended through exhaustion rather than peace. Every nation was too damaged to continue fighting. When the Galactic Council made contact 15 years ago, they had strict requirements for membership. Humanity had to decommission its military fleet and adopt peaceful propulsion systems. No kinetic weapons, no nuclear arsenals, no weapons of mass destruction. Earth wanted access to galactic technology and trade networks badly enough to agree. Ceremonies were held as the great warships were supposedly destroyed. The council praised humanity for choosing peace over violence, but a small group of military leaders had argued that destroying everything was foolish. They convinced key politicians that humanity needed insurance. The council seemed friendly, but the universe was vast and unknown. What if the peace did not last? What if humanity needed to defend itself without council approval? The archive was created in secret, hidden in classified budgets and black site operations. 2,000 warships were not destroyed. They were mothballed and hidden in places the council never thought to look. Some were concealed in the asteroid belt, powered down and covered in rock to look like natural formations. Others were sunk in Earth's deepest ocean trenches, waiting in the dark. More were hidden in lunar caverns and Martian canyons. Crews were trained in secret, rotating through what official records called deep space monitoring stations. Weapons were maintained, reactors were tested, and combat drills were run far from council sensors. For 15 years, the archive had waited, hoping they would never be needed. Patricia explained that the fleet was ready. Every ship could launch within 72 hours. The crews were experienced volunteers who understood what they were signing up for. The weapon systems were primitive by council standards, but that was exactly the point. Council shields were designed to stop energy weapons and deflect space debris. They had never needed to stop solid projectiles moving at combat speeds, because no civilized species used such barbaric tactics anymore. Human railguns and missiles would cut through council defenses like paper. Richard asked about casualties. Patricia was honest. If they did this, people would die. Council forces would respond and some human ships would be lost. But the archive had spent 15 years studying council military doctrine. The alien species had not fought a real war in thousands of years. Their tactics were based on honor codes and rules of engagement. They expected warnings and negotiations before any shooting started. Humanity would have every advantage in the opening moments of combat. The second case contained personnel files. Patricia recommended Captain Lewis Grant to lead the operation. Lewis had commanded the battleship Vengeance during the final year of the Resource Wars. He had held the line at the Battle of Europa, when 3 nations tried to take the lunar colonies simultaneously. His tactics were brutal and effective. He accepted suicide missions and brought his crews home alive. After the wars, he had retired to a quiet life, but Patricia had kept in touch. Lewis would do this if asked. Richard spent 3 hours reviewing the files and asking questions. Patricia answered everything with cold professionalism. She did not try to convince him either way. This was not her decision to make. She simply provided the information and waited. Outside, the protests were growing larger. People were burning Galactic Council flags and demanding Earth withdraw from the alien alliance. Some were calling for war. Richard thought about Emma Morrison. 7 years old with her whole life ahead of her, dead because she touched a stone. He thought about every human living on council worlds, vulnerable to alien laws and alien justice. He thought about the message Earth would send if they did nothing. Humanity would be forever marked as weak, as acceptable targets, as a species that could be pushed around. He asked Patricia one final question. Could they win? Not just one battle, but could humanity actually stand against the Galactic Council if this escalated? Patricia considered her answer carefully. In a total war, the Council would eventually overwhelm Earth through sheer numbers. But that was not what this operation was about. This was about making the Council understand that hurting humans came with a price. This was about showing the galaxy that humanity had teeth and was willing to use them. This was about justice for one dead child and protection for every human who would come after. Richard made his decision. He authorized the archive to begin Operation Reckoning. The fleet would launch in secret and make for Nexus Prime. Their mission was to extract every human from Council space and deliver one message to the aliens. Humanity would not be victims. Not now, not ever. If the Council wanted peace, they would have to earn it by treating humans as equals rather than primitives. Patricia saluted and left to begin preparations. Richard sat alone in the office, knowing he had just started something that could not be stopped. He hoped history would remember why this was necessary. He hoped Emma's parents would understand. Most of all, he hoped the galaxy was ready for what humanity looked like when it stopped pretending to be civilized. The call came to Lewis Grant at 3 in the morning. He was dreaming about Europa again, the battle that had made him famous and cost him everything he cared about. When his secure phone rang, He knew immediately that his retirement was over. Nobody used that number unless the world was ending. He answered and listened to Admiral Patricia Hayes explain the situation in calm, measured tones. A child was dead and Earth needed someone who remembered how to fight without rules. Lewis did not hesitate. He told Patricia he would be on the next transport to the lunar staging base. His wife Kelly stood in the doorway, watching him pack his old uniform. She did not ask questions because she already knew the answers. Lewis had told her years ago that if this call ever came, he would have to go. She helped him fold the uniform properly and kissed him goodbye at the door. He promised to come back, but they both knew that promise might be empty. Some missions did not allow for safe returns. The lunar base was hidden inside Shackleton Crater, disguised as a mining operation. Lewis arrived to find controlled chaos as thousands of personnel moved through activation protocols. Ships that had been dark for 15 years were coming online. Reactors were achieving stable fusion. Weapon systems were running diagnostic checks. The archive had done its job well. Everything worked exactly as designed. Patricia met him in the command center and introduced him to his senior staff. Vice Admiral Karen White would handle tactical planning. She was younger than Lewis, only 40, but she had been with the archive since its founding. Karen knew every ship in the fleet and had spent 15 years developing battle strategies against Council forces. She showed Lewis her simulation results with quiet confidence. The Council had superior technology but inferior experience. They would not expect human aggression and would hesitate at critical moments. That hesitation would cost them everything. Colonel Stephen Hughes commanded the Marine detachment. 10,000 soldiers trained specifically for hostile boarding actions and ground operations. Stephen had fought in the tail end of the resource wars as a teenager and never forgot the lessons. His troops were equipped with magnetic boots, breaching charges, and weapons designed to work in zero gravity. They had practiced storming alien ship layouts built from stolen Council databases. Stephen promised Lewis that if they needed to take Nexus Prime by force, his Marines could do it with minimal casualties. The flagship was the carrier Ragnarok, a massive vessel that had been the pride of the European Federation during the wars. It carried 400 fighter craft and enough firepower to level a small continent. Lewis walked through its corridors and felt ghosts watching him. The last time he had been on a ship like this, millions were dying on Earth below. He had sworn never to return to war. Now here he was, older and tired, about to lead humanity into battle against aliens who thought they were civilized. The fleet assembled over 3 days. Ships emerged from hiding places across the solar system, converging on rally points beyond Neptune where Council sensors could not reach. 2,000 warships of various sizes, from small destroyers to massive battleships. Each one was a relic of humanity's darkest era, built when survival meant being willing to destroy everything. The crews were volunteers who had trained for this moment, knowing they might be starting a war that could end their species. Karen presented the battle plan to all senior officers. The fleet would travel through unmonitored space using old fusion drives. The journey would take 3 weeks but would avoid all Council shipping lanes and sensor networks. Any vessel that spotted them would be intercepted and disabled. The crews held safely until the operation concluded. Intelligence indicated 47 Council warships in the Nexus Prime system, representing 7 different species. None of them were on high alert because the Council had not fought a war in 3,000 years. The plan was simple and brutal. The fleet would drop out of faster-than-light travel at close range, giving the Council minimal reaction time. All ships would fire simultaneously, targeting propulsion and weapon systems with kinetic rounds. Nuclear missiles would follow to disable electronics. The goal was not to kill aliens, but to neutralize them so completely that resistance became impossible. Once the Council fleet was broken, the Marines would secure the human colony and evacuate every person. Then Ambassador Helen Carter would deliver humanity's demands. Lewis approved the plan with one modification. He wanted to give the Council a chance to surrender before the shooting started. Not because he expected them to accept, but because he wanted the galaxy to know the. Jake Morrison was waiting at the colony entrance with 600 frightened humans. He had gotten them organized despite their fear and confusion. When he saw the Marines arriving in their combat armor, carrying weapons that looked like they belonged in a museum, he felt something break inside his chest. Earth had come for them. Earth had not forgotten. He saluted Stephen even though he was a civilian, and Stephen returned it with respect. They both understood what this moment meant. The evacuation began immediately. Families were loaded onto transport ships with whatever belongings they could carry. The Marines held the perimeter against scattered resistance from alien security forces, who did not understand what was happening. A few aliens tried to stop the evacuation, citing council law and proper procedures. Stephen informed them that council law no longer applied to human citizens. They could step aside or be moved aside. Most chose to step aside. Helen Carter remained in the council chambers as the evacuation proceeded. Protector Thane was receiving reports of the devastation in orbit and the Marine landing. He demanded to know how humans had hidden such military capability. Helen explained that Earth had never been honest about disarmament. Humanity had learned long ago to keep insurance policies against those who claimed to be friends. The Council had assumed humans were weak and primitive. That assumption had cost them dearly. Thane tried one final time to negotiate. Surely this could be resolved through dialogue and compromise. Helen shook her head. The time for dialogue had ended when Zelthor murdered a child. Earth wanted one thing and one thing only: justice. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session surrounded by reports of devastation that none of them could fully process. Species that had not seen war in millennia struggled to understand what had happened in orbit. Their defense fleet had been shattered in minutes by weapons they considered obsolete and tactics they deemed barbaric. Protector Thane looked at the casualty reports with 3 eyes that could not believe what they were reading. Thousands dead, billions in damaged infrastructure, and human warships now controlled the space around Nexus Prime, with their weapons trained on the planet itself. Helen Carter stood before them without apology or regret. She explained that Earth's patience had limits and the Council had found them. The demand remained simple and unchanged. High Commander Zelthor must be surrendered to human custody within 1 hour, or the human fleet would begin orbital bombardment of Velkari installations. President Cole had authorized the use of all necessary force to achieve justice for Emma Morrison. The galaxy could accept this reality, or test whether humans were bluffing. The Velkari delegation erupted in fury. Drakthor declared that his people were warriors who had conquered entire star systems in the ancient past. They would never surrender one of their commanders to inferior species, regardless of military threats. Zelthor himself appeared on the communication channels from the Velkari embassy on the planet's surface. He mocked humanity's grief and called them emotional children throwing a tantrum. The Velkari had acted according to their law and would face no consequences from primitives who barely understood space travel. Lewis Grant received the Velkari response on the Ragnarok Bridge. Karen White asked if he wanted to wait for further negotiations. Lewis shook his head. He had given them the chance to do this peacefully, and they had chosen pride over wisdom. He opened a direct channel to President Cole on Earth and requested authorization to proceed with the demonstration. Cole's response came back after a long pause. The president authorized one strike against a military target, with advance warning to minimize casualties. Make them understand but do not massacre. Then the Ragnarok moved into position over the Velkari embassy complex on Nexus Prime. Lewis ordered all personnel to evacuate the target area and gave them exactly 10 minutes. The warning was broadcast on all frequencies in every known language. Alien civilians and Velkari staff began fleeing the complex in panic. Some thought it was a bluff. Others recognized that humans had already proven they meant every word they spoke. At the 9-minute mark, the complex was mostly empty. Lewis gave the order to fire. A single railgun slug launched from the Ragnarok with a thunderous electromagnetic pulse. The projectile hit the embassy complex with the kinetic force of a small nuclear weapon. The building vaporized instantly. The ground beneath it liquefied from the impact. A crater 300 meters wide appeared where the embassy had stood seconds before. The shockwave shattered windows for kilometers in every direction. Mushroom clouds of debris rose into the atmosphere visible from orbit. The destruction was absolute and terrifying in its precision. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. This was not how civilized species behaved. This was not how conflicts were resolved in the age of peace and prosperity. But the humans were not civilized by council standards. They were something older and more dangerous. They were survivors who had nearly destroyed themselves and learned lessons written in the ashes of their own cities. The council had assumed humans would follow their rules. The assumption was proving catastrophically wrong. Protector Thane tried desperately to regain control of the situation. He called for immediate ceasefire and offered to mediate between Earth and the Valkyrie. Lewis responded that mediation was no longer on the table. The Ragnarok had dozens more railgun rounds and hundreds of nuclear missiles. The human fleet could reduce every Valkyrie installation in the system to rubble within hours. The choice was simple: surrender Zelthor or watch their infrastructure burn. No more negotiations, no more delays, no more council procedures. The Valkyrie government faced a decision they had never imagined making. Their warrior culture valued honor and strength above all else. Surrendering to human demands would be seen as weakness that might threaten their political stability. But the alternative was destruction on a scale they could not defend against. Their own warships were wrecked in orbit. Their allies in the council were paralyzed with shock. The humans had proven they would follow through on every threat. Pride was expensive when the cost was measured in burning cities. After 2 hours of internal debate, the Valkyrie High Command made their choice. Zelthor was stripped of rank and handed over to human marines in chains. The warrior who had killed a child to defend his honor was now being dragged to a transport ship by soldiers whose species he had called primitive. Drakthor protested in the council chambers, but his words rang hollow. The Valkyrie had chosen survival over pride, and everyone knew it. Jake Morrison was given the honor of guarding Zelthor during the journey back to Earth. He stood in the holding cell and looked at the alien who had murdered his daughter. Zelthor still showed no remorse. He claimed he had followed his people's law and regretted nothing. Jake wanted to hurt him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain Emma had suffered. But he did not. He simply watched in silence as the ship accelerated toward Earth. Justice would come through proper channels. Humanity would not become what they hated. The human fleet withdrew from Nexus Prime after loading every human colonist, diplomat, and scientist. 47 ships had come to stop them. 31 were destroyed and 16 had fled or surrendered. Not one human vessel was lost. The message was clear to anyone watching. Humanity could fight and win against superior numbers when motivated by righteous anger. The species the Council had dismissed as newcomers had teeth sharper than anyone imagined. Ambassador Helen Carter delivered Earth's final statement to the assembled Council. President Cole had authorized her to speak with absolute authority. Humanity was severing all diplomatic ties with the Galactic Council effective immediately. Earth would not participate in a system that allowed children to be murdered under the protection of diplomatic immunity. The Council could reform its laws to protect all member species equally, or it could continue as before. Either way, humanity was done pretending to respect institutions that did not respect human lives. Helen explained that Earth would not rejoin the Council until specific reforms were implemented. Member species could no longer claim sovereign immunity for violent crimes committed against citizens of other species. Independent courts must be established to handle interspecies disputes. The Council must acknowledge that all member species deserved equal protection under the law, regardless of how long they had been part of galactic civilization. Until these changes occurred, Earth would pursue its own path among the stars. The fleet returned to Earth as heroes. Millions gathered at spaceports to welcome home the soldiers and evacuated colonists. President Cole addressed the planet and the galaxy in a speech broadcast on all frequencies. He spoke about justice and the price of underestimating humanity. Earth had tried to fit into the galactic community peacefully. They had followed Council rules and swallowed their pride when treated as inferiors. But there were lines that could not be crossed. Harming human children was one of those lines. The galaxy now understood what happened when those lines were violated. Zelthor was tried in human courts under Earth law. The trial was broadcast across known space so every species could see human justice in action. Evidence was presented, witnesses testified, and Zelthor was given every opportunity to defend himself. The verdict was guilty of murder. The sentence was death. Zelthor was executed by lethal injection while billions watched. Some species were horrified by the barbarism. Others quietly admitted that perhaps the human approach to justice had merit. The Galactic Council fractured in the aftermath. Some species called for sanctions against Earth and military action to punish human aggression. Others, particularly younger species who had chafed under elder race dominance, began approaching humanity directly. They wanted trade agreements and defense pacts with the species that had proven the Council was not invincible. The balance of galactic power shifted as humanity became the center of a new coalition, built on mutual respect rather than enforced hierarchy. Earth did not mothball the fleet again. The warships remained active, patrolling human space and escorting merchant vessels. New crews were trained openly. Weapons were improved with lessons learned from the Nexus Prime engagement. Humanity had learned the most important lesson the galaxy could teach. Peace was not maintained by hoping others would be kind. Peace was maintained by ensuring that aggression cost more than anyone was willing to pay. Jake Morrison retired to Montana, far from the stars and politics. He built a small house near the mountains and planted an oak tree in his backyard. Every morning he would sit beneath that tree and remember Emma. She had been so full of wonder and joy, eager to explore the universe. Her death had sparked a war that changed galactic civilization. Jake hoped she would have understood why her father let others fight while he stayed home. Some battles were won with warships. Others were won by remembering why the fighting mattered. The galaxy learned to fear the species that mourned its children with fire and fury.